in and he had 40 monkeys that he kept in his barracks, and he told people that he'd learned a good chunk of the monkey language, something like 60 monkey words. And he said, and he named all the monkeys. One was his wife, one was his chaplain, one was his doctor, one was his aide-de-camp, his secretary, and all the monkeys apparently had sort of personality traits that led him to name him these, and so I thought, this is great. This is like the monkey acting out the colonial enterprise in Richard Burton's house when he was a young officer. So I made a lot of paintings about this. It's perfect.
You did sort of these individual paintings.
There's the chaplain. He's eating a lot. He's sort of greedy monkey, but he's reaching for another mango, even though he hasn't finished the one he's eating. And but his fingers have miraculously come into this sort of benediction, And he's sitting in the graveyard because what chaplains did in India, they were people in India said all they ever did was take money to bury people because everybody was dying like flies, all the Brits. So they'd bury somebody, get money, and then go eat, and they were like considered like debauched. So he's in the graveyard feasting away, looking very pious and sad,
And now we have like a whole...
There's the monkey bank.
Whole entourage of them.
Yeah, those are Burton's monkeys that he identified by name. And the yellow one is the wife. She sat in a baby's high chair next to Richard Burton with little earrings in her ears, which is...
And you call this the sensorium because...
Yeah, I thought about Richard Burton because he was one of the Victorian, little pre-Victorian, but these British people of the 19th century who could learn almost everything there was to learn on the planet at that time. We didn't have nuclear physicists and stuff, so there was this almost an ability to know everything knowable. And that was the kind of person Richard Burton was. He thought he could learn all the languages but he did it by immersing himself completely in whatever culture he was in. So like the British government was always sending him on these weird missions because he could learn any language, disguise himself in any disguise and go places. A remarkable guy. And like one time they sent him into the brothels to investigate the brothels because they had so much VD and they were trying to figure out how to clean it up. And he came back with these explicit accounts of every little detail that happened in there that made it quite obvious that he did everything that he wrote about. Boys, he was getting into stuff and they're like, okay, that's enough. And they'd get furious at him for this kind of stuff. But I just thought the sensorium is just this idea of immersing yourself in the senses. So this painting is his monkeys. They're all the chaplain that's in that. But it's also an allegory of the senses.
And you have all senses represented in there. Right?
That's right. The female, the little wife is sight. Then you can see touch, taste, smell. Sound is the screaming monkey on the ground. Oh my goodness. Do I have to talk about this one?
Well,
nice line. Maybe we should skip it.
Tell us a word or two. We're almost through.
Okay, he's it's again from the Panchatantra, I believe, which is the title of my book. The Panchatantra is an ancient. It's one of the oldest books on the planet. Like from the time of ancient Egypt or something. But in India, they had animal fables, and they're very amusing. And it was called Panchatantra, which means 5 tales or 5 stories, and but it's really 5 divisions of many, many stories. And one of the stories I believe I believe it's this one. And it was that there were wise Brahmins who were so pious and so learned that they were magic. They could do anything. Float in the air, do whatever the hell they wanted. And they're walking with their servant who is a simpleton, a moron. And they beat him and they tell him, he's an idiot. And they come on this skeleton in the woods and they say, and the first one says, I can reassemble this skeleton. And so he with my great learning, and he does. And then the next is, he says, I can put flesh and skin on this animal, and he does. And right at that moment, the simpleton says, this looks like it's not going in a good place. So he climbs a tree, because what he sees is that they've reconstructed a lion. And of course, the last one says, I can bring it back to life. And this is the moment when the lion gets up, a dead lion rising up to kill the 3 Brahmins. And the simpleton's safe in the tree. So it's called The Far Shores of Scholarship. because they said that's where they said there were 3 Brahmins who had reached the far shores of scholarship, which I really love that sentence. So this is Audubon. Audubon was in New Hampshire. I think he was in New Hampshire when this happened, yeah. And a farmer knew this knucklehead was around buying birds, you know. So he had set a fox trap, the farmer, and he caught a golden eagle in the fox trap. And the golden eagle had flown something like 2 miles with the fox trap, dragging the log, you know. I've had experience with golden eagles. They took a picture of me with one once. And it's just about the most powerful animal. They have a grip strength of something like 2,000 pounds in each per square inch in their claws, and they got a talons 3 inches on the back. And the Mongolian horsemen kill wolves with these things, and they can easily kill a person. And the way they do it is, all of this grip strength in their 2 claws, they do this, and they kind of go around the base of your skull, and they separate your spine from the base of your skull like that. And they feel around a little bit until they find it, and then they just. So like when you have one on your arm. I was holding one once, and the falconer, and I started getting tired because they're a little bit heavy. I start lowering my arms. He goes, no, they like to climb to the highest spot. I'm like, fucking that's. Oh, but that wasn't the story. I got to tell the story.
Okay, we'll go back.
Audubon bought the eagle from the farmer, and he decided he had to kill it, but he had to kill it without messing up his feathers. So he decided he was going to smoke it to death. So he put it in a closet and he lit a fire underneath, and it smoldered for like 10, 15 hours. He looks in the thing and the golden eagle's just looking at him, like, you know. And so then he puts a bunch of sulfur on the flames, and it starts making this unbelievable stench. And he shuts the door and he puts blankets all around and everything. And he leaves for another, like, I don't know how many hours, right? And he peers back in there, and of course you know what happened. He's just like, all right, what do you got, you know? And so then Audubon takes this needle, like a piece of steel, and he shoves it into the heart of the eagle, and he kills it. And then Audubon paints the thing. It takes him 14 days to paint the bird, and you can imagine what the bird was like after 14 days. And then Audubon, probably because of that, falls ill and is sick and is in a delirium in his illness. So this is called delirium, and I thought of both the bird's delirium as he was being smoked to death and Audubon's delirium. All the signs of the bird's martyrdom, like a Christian painting, you know, the smoke pouring out of the bird's mouth, and it's pierced in the trap, but it's soaring away. You know, it's either the bird imagining that it could get away, but then Audubon's collapsed in the snow with his illness, and it could be his delirium as well, his fever dream. So it's the bird and the.
Let me ask you, if someone wanted to find stories like this about Audubon and other, you know, really incredibly detailed accounts, where will they find this information?
Well, the easiest way at this point is to buy my really expensive book because they're in the back.
And the second easiest?
The second easiest is Audubon did leave behind his journals, and they're published by Dover.
Okay.
And they're in 2 volumes, and they're just, it's everything.
Filled with stories like this.
Which is amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
he really shows he tips his hand, you know.
Right.
I mean, you don't have to, you know, nobody knows these stories about him, but you know. And these are the people that formed our views about the natural world. So I think it's worth telling the stories from more or less their point of view. Like Audubon would look at this and he wouldn't be horrified. He was there, you know. We look at it and we're like, what the hell's going on here? You know, I mean, to me, it's a surreal image based on reality, you know. Everything in here that looks weird is factual in a sense, you know.
How about this one? Is it factual?
Yeah, extremely so. That bird is a great auk. It's extinct. It was made into feather beds. It lived in Newfoundland and places like that. It was a flightless auk. It was kind of like a puffin, but larger, and based on and designed just like a penguin, because that's the only design that works for catching fish underwater. For this particular type of bird, you need to have these. You know, you need to be built this way. Anyway, they had obviously wonderful feathers for pillows and beds. So people would go to the island and herd them up and, you know, boil their feathers in great vats and send the feathers back to England or wherever. But the very last written account of anybody who had seen the bird, it was something like 30 years after they thought they were completely gone. One showed up on this tiny island off the coast of Scotland. Very superstitious people on the island that were very isolated, and they'd never seen such a thing, and they'd never even heard of it. And it was native to their part of the world, but this was freaking them out. And they caught it, and they dragged it around, and they put it in a bothy, you know, a little like a little stone, and it started making a lot of noise and biting their hand, and then a huge storm blew up, and they decided it was a witch. So they stoned it to death. And so this is the Witch of St. Kilda.
Now, and this has a great story behind it.
Oh my goodness.
Astoria.
Yeah, Astoria.
Yeah.
There was a young Irish kid who worked for John Jacob Astor, and Astor was a millionaire that lived in New York, but had many. He had a huge fur trapping industry in the 1810, 12, you know, right through. And a lot of Astoria, Queens was named after him in a lot of places. But he had forts in the Columbia River Valley in what is now Washington, which was just Indian Territory. And he sent this young Irish clerk out there, and there was a great wagon train going through the woods, and the clerk took a break at lunch and slept under a tree, and the wagon train left without him. And he was left in the wilderness for something like 2 weeks. And he was fresh off the boat from Ireland. He didn't know what to do. And he was starving to death, eating berries, and he was desperate. He didn't see any people. And he fell asleep in a log right when he was on the moment of death. His shoes had rotted away, so he was ripping his pants legs and tying them around his feet to keep his bloody feet from getting worse. And a bear came to the log he was asleep in and tried to pull him out of the log. And he somehow got away from the bear and climbed a tree and was stuck there. The bear fell asleep under the tree, and he was up there for days. And finally, Indians came and saved him and dragged him to a fort, and they fed him salmon, and they resuscitated him. But it got me thinking about, this was, John Jacob Astor's company was the most powerful, you know, he's one of the richest men that ever lived. And he had this great infrastructure of power, forts and wagon trains going between them, and everybody was armed to the teeth, and it was like, you know, we were occupying a foreign country with a corporate structure. And this guy got separate from the power structure, and he ended up like a larva, you know?
And where did you find this story? How did you find this story?
Well, there'll be a book that says Adventures in the Columbia River Gorge by this kid, 1812. That's enough for me. I buy the book. I start flipping through it. I figure there's going to be something there.
And then finally, this will be the last image we look at, Shelter Island.
Actually, it was funny. The New Yorker magazine likes me for whatever reason, and they call me, and I know them there, and so they call me once in a while, and they offer me something that an artist can't refuse. They just say, well, we're all sitting around, and we thought it's summer. Maybe Walton will make us a painting about summer. That's all they don't tell me anything else. You can have 2 pages in the magazine, and it'll be about summer. So it's not. Because don't ask me to paint something. It really annoys the hell out of me, but they know that. They're my friends. And so they just let me go. Can you do something about summer? And I thought about it a lot, and it was a bad summer. There was a lot of bad stuff happening in Iraq, and it was a lot of, I think it was when all the bombs were going off in Spain. I don't know, just bad stuff. So I was thinking about what kind of happy summer scene I would do. And I was looking at Dutch still lifes that were done during the 30 Years' War. It had metaphors for death in them, and it would be a skull, or it wouldn't just be a metaphor for death. It would be about fleeting pleasure. So you'd show fruit that was a bit overripe, and you'd have a fly on the fruit to show that these pleasures are fleeting, that everything is rotting, and so I made a summer still life like that. There's a skull mixed in with all the sort of bounty that you would find. And I set it in the Hamptons because that's where New Yorker people who read the New Yorker go. So it's in Shelter Island. It's a very nice community. And it's as if like there's just so much waste. Yeah, and so that's what it is. They call those types of paintings vanitas paintings.
Right.
And they are meant to be. And what's interesting is these visual languages have been sort of lost to modern viewers. But a Dutch person in the 16th century would know what this painting meant right away. They'd see all the little things and they'd say, oh God, we have to enjoy life while we can. You know, and that would be an instant message. But instead, you put a picture like this in front of a contemporary viewer and they say, what's it mean? And I thought, I'm going to use those languages for all they're worth. I'm really interested in them. I don't think they're dead languages, and I think even when you say, what's it mean, there's some deep thing that tells you what it means. Like,
Well, and as in all your work, again, as we've heard, you find your points of inspiration in books and stories and news items and what's going on in the world.
And art history.
And art history, but overall, I think, I sum up the work as animals behaving badly, essentially, and it just points to how people behave when they're not on their best behavior.
Right.
And things that we all need to look at. So, to just reiterate a point we made at the start, people can come to see this work, and while it's interesting to know the details, which we've heard very wonderful accounts today, you don't need to know them to get something from the work. Not only is it, of course, technically and beautifully rendered, but I think there's meaning for everyone from our own daily experiences to be found in the work, and that's what great art does. It invites us to investigate the art and what possible meanings might be within it. So I want to thank you, Walton, for sharing some of the details with us, but I hope we'll continue to enjoy just the works for their own sake as well. Where's Nicole with the microphone? There you are. Okay.
Oh, wow.
So
it's like a game show.
So up towards the back. Oh, here. Let's start with the center because you're a little closer to the center. Nicole.
That's so cool.
Nicole will pass the microphone.
Whose hand was up?
Yeah.
Yeah. The question.
There's a question over here, Nicole.
Yeah.
Well,
no, neither do I.
we're recording it though, so it'll help.
So you do need it. Huh? Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Thanks for all those stories.
Well,
When we went through the gallery before, I kept thinking like, what were you thinking, and you really helped me get a little image of what you were trying to do with the paintings.
yeah, I think that if you get that, then you know that they're all basically like that, and then you don't need every single story. You know what I mean?
Sure.
It's definitely, you get the idea,
I was really enamored by your use of cityscapes in a lot of the paintings. I saw one that had Lower Manhattan. You could still see the World Trade Centers there and the Hudson River coming down through, and then the one with the looked like it was maybe a Sherpa or a porter carrying the box of Heineken on his back and that type of thing. But all the different use of cityscape in the paintings was really interesting to me in such detailed natural history portrayal. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the juxtaposition of the two.
Well, it's definitely, a lot of these, it's weird, a lot of the decisions you make that are visual or practical, later you can go back and sort of realize that they're a theoretical lock with what you're doing. You know what I mean? Like, I remember reading a quote from Sam Shepard where he said, I didn't set out to write plays about the closing of the American West and the malaise that, blah, 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 and the death of cities or whatever, that everything that was actually in his plays, he was trying to write a family drama, like this is about my brother and I, and how much I hate my brother, and that's what he's trying to get through, but it ends up being about so much more. And a lot of these paintings, the impulse will be, I want to paint that weird animal. And then I start to read about the animal and read about the region that the animal came from, and ideas come out of that. So what I realize when you have urban areas is that it reinforces the idea that this is not a natural history picture about animals. In other words, I don't say, and it's not an environmental picture about, oh, this is an endangered species, or this is so sad that there's global warming. This is like I said, the cultural history, It's about our, as people, interaction with the natural world and how our perceptions of the natural world have evolved, So that I think having a city in the background, that's perfect, you know. It reinforces the fact that these are about the great indoors as well. Institutions like the Museum of Natural History, you know, places that inform us about how to approach nature, you know.
Can I ask another question?
Sure, I guess. I don't know if they,
Well,
I'm
you
not
have the
in
mic,
control.
so one more, and then we'll pass it to someone else.
The detail, of course, in the animals is just amazing. You know, here's kingfishers, and there's cobras, and there's herons, and all the scales on the fish and everything. What are you using for your models besides the dioramas at the Museum of Natural History? Are you using taxidermy examples? Are you using other artist illustrations? Are you using photos, or all of the above? I mean, I can't
All of
imagine you saw a tiger in Vietnam. What was
No,
what
and
was the
also
model?
that tiger's so kind of wrong, you know what I mean? Like some of them are kind of weird and specific details might be incorrect, which also is good when it comes to my idea.
Like the first plants you painted.
Right. Like I can accept the wrong plants because I can find natural history images from the 19th century that where all the plants are all screwed up. You know, it's like, again, about cultural misapprehension. So when I get the details wrong, I'm off the hook in a sense because it is a reflection of, you know, again, it works towards working, it strengthens the metaphor rather than weakens it. So I'm less concerned than, say, it's traditional bird artists in getting it right, which frees me up quite a bit. But then as far as that other question, where do I get, I obviously, photography, you know, like you said, natural history collections, when I can get to the specimen, I do go there and draw it. There's no doubt I will do that. When I can't find it anywhere, you know, I go online and download photographs as much as I can. I have probably a couple of thousand books in my studio. I give myself permission to buy whatever book I want if it's going to help me make my work. Because, you know, even the most expensive book is still cheaper than one of my watercolors. So I have to just let myself do that. It's crazy, my studio with books. It's overwhelming and sometimes really hard to find them because I don't have a librarian that works for me. And I'm a slob, which doesn't help.
Next question. Someone, is there another question somewhere? Up in the front. Oh, I'm sorry, we've got someone back there. Then the next one will be up in the front.
Yes, I wanted to ask about the, would you repeat the type of watercolor paper you were using?
Sure. It's just called Saunders. It's a British maker. You know, Saunders,
Okay.
Saunders.
I also wanted to ask you about the gouache, the type of gouache you used, and watercolors.
The watercolors I use are Old Holland. They're very beautiful, very super concentrated, and they've been making them the same way since about 1620 in Amsterdam, so I try to get those when I can. When I run out, I still bop down to the local art supply store and just get Winsor Newton if I'm running out, but it's not my first choice. I buy in tubes and cakes. I don't care. I need both. If I squeeze the tubes into the cakes sometimes, and then if they harden up overnight, you know, there they are. What else? The gouache is just Winsor Newton gouache. I haven't really found a better gouache. And the gouache is sort of limited in the amount that I use it. I put it in there for highlights and little crispy details, but the transparent watercolor is what gives it the luminosity. If you painted my pictures purely with gouache, they end up looking quite chalky and washed out because gouache has a lot of whiting in it. It has a lot of, so that's technical stuff that non-artists are not going to be so interested in, but there you go.
Where did you use the graphite? I wasn't able to determine where the graphite
Just where I draw in pencil, write in pencil, rather even the notations are often in pencil.
Okay.
That's when they write graphite. There's
Okay.
usually some graphite in there somewhere, like a little piece of writing or script, or even just my initials in the corner. And then I use graphite pencil to draw everything, so there's still lines of it underneath. So if you're going to be super careful about telling the materials, like my gallery is, they include graphite, even though a lot of times it's underneath the paint.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
We had a question up here on the front.
I know.
Do you do a lot of studies first?
Yes.
Small things?
Yeah.